Hey guys, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Vish and I'm here to wrap up all the books that I read in the month of June. I hope you had a great reading month in June. I had a standard month of reading in June. So let's go through the stats of the month. So I read 6 books and DNF'd 1. So in total, we'll be talking about 7 books in this wrap up. And I read 3,029 pages, not including the DNF. And in terms of star rating, I have 4 4 stars, 1 3 star, 1 2.5 stars, and then the 1 DNF. And including the DNF, here are the stats of the genres and age range. So I read 3 romances, 2 fantasies, and 2 mysteries, and I read 5 adult novels and 2 YA novels. In terms of series, I started 3 series, one of them I DNF, so realistically I started 2 series, and then I continued 3 series, and then one of them was just a standalone. And in terms of where my books were sourced, 5 of them were library books and 1 of them was from my Kindle library, and the DNF is from my physical TBR. So those are the stats for the month of June. So a lot of them were library books, as I said, so I don't have all of them with me, so it's just going to be pictures today, which is very annoying in terms of editing, but you know, we're going with the flow. And looking at these stats, I do wish I'm reading more of my physical TBR. And not to say a lot of my library books that I borrow are not from my physical TBR, it's just this month specifically, none of them are in my physical TBR. So I need to calm down on the library holds. But looking at the month of July, I'm still doing it. Technically, most of the library books are sequels to the books that I do own, if you know what I mean. So it's not too bad. Anyway, let's jump into the books that I read in the month of June. So the first 2 books that I want to talk about go hand in hand because they're part of the same series, and these 2 are adult dark romance contemporary novels. So I read the first and second book in the Dark Prince Road, and that is My Dark Romeo and My Dark Desire by L.J. Shannon S. Huntington. So let's talk about the first book, My Dark Romeo. It follows Romeo and Dallas, and Dallas is this spoiled trust fund brat that has been betrothed to this guy since they were kids. So in the beginning, Dallas attends this debutante ball, and from the get-go you can definitely see that she's very sheltered. She's never worked a day in her life. She's very naive. And here is where she meets the famous Romeo Costa. She was trying to steal his shortbread. And that's not code, it's genuine biscuits. The amount of food this girl eats in this book and also in the second book is astounding. No shame, it's just where does it all go? And Romeo Costa is branded as a psychotic billionaire, and he basically makes a few moves that gets Dallas into a compromising position, and then Dallas is forced to marry Romeo, and then we kind of find out he did that on purpose because his rival is Dallas's betrothed, and Romeo wanted to get revenge on said rival. It kind of reminded me of season 1 of Bridgerton, if you remember. It's that whole Daphne and Simon like in the garden rendezvous, and then they kind of get caught, you know? That's what basically happened to Romeo and Dallas. And further into the book as well, there's a lot of familiar storylines also reflected in Bridgerton season 1. I won't go into that because it would be spoilers, but I did give this book 3 stars. I read this in like 24 hours. I stayed up till 6 a.m. reading this book. It is entertaining, it is toxic, it is ridiculous, but it was just such a good time and I had fun. And honestly, that's it. That's literally my review of this. It's just so entertaining, toxic, and unhinged and fun. And the one thing I guess that I really did not like is the talk of motherhood in this. It's a very strong plot point of this book in the latter half of this book, and I didn't really care about that part, but I would recommend this if you're looking for an unhinged time. So now let's talk about the second book, My Dark Desire. So the second book follows Zach's son, and I did mention this, but the Dark Prince Road basically follows 3 best friends. The first one is Romeo, the second one is Zach, and the third one is Ollie. We'll get to Ollie. So the second book follows Zach, and he is this tech billionaire mogul person that lives on Dark Prince Road right across the street from Romeo. Anyway, Zach's mother is pressuring him to marry, and she basically sets up this party slash ball for all the eligible girls to come in and for Zach to meet and choose who to marry. Again, very British. And then we have our female main character, Pharaoh, whose father just recently died. This is very Cinderella coded, by the way. And her father recently died, so she's stuck with her stepmother and two stepsisters. And her father had a cleaning business, and the stepmother is just neglecting to take care of this business. So Pharaoh steps up and takes care of this business by actually cleaning the mansions herself. And she also is a Olympic level fencer, and she's trying to get into the Olympics. And she finds out that her stepmother has sold a lot of her father's things, and one of the things is a jade pendant necklace. And she finds out Zach is the one that purchased that necklace. So during this ball, Pharaoh sneaks in to steal this pendant, and of course Zach caught her stealing. And she's very interested in her just because intellectually they match, and she ends up basically running away from him and leaving her shoe behind. Told you, very Cinderella coded. So because Zach essentially caught her, he blackmailed her into working in his house to clean his house for trying to steal the necklace. And also there's other things as well that he is providing for her to accept it, but that's spoilers and I won't go into it. But the mystery element in this is definitely interesting, but I will say for this book I gave 2.5 stars. It was not as entertaining, it was not as unhinged as the first book. It's actually quite emotional, the second book. There's a lot of talk about grief and overcoming said grief because both Zach and Pharaoh have lost their father, Zach in a more violent way, but I wouldn't recommend continuing on with the second book. But I will say, just because I read the first and the second book, I'm kind of attached and I care about the characters because you see all of their interactions in the first and second book, and I quite like the bromance between Romeo and Zach. Not Ollie. Ollie is disgusting. He's a borderline sexual abuser, to be honest, and I'm not reading the third book, which follows him and his romance. No, thank you. So I'm definitely not continuing on with the series. I'm done with the series at the second book. So I would recommend the first book if you want to have a wild time, but if you're looking for that same thing in the second book, it's not there. So after that toxic disaster, I wanted to get into an actual romance book. So the third book that I read in the month of June is The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. And this is my first Mariana Zapata book, and I really, really enjoyed it. So what this is about, we're following our main character, Vanessa, who is a personal assistant to a huge American football player called Aiden. And Vanessa has been working for Aiden for 2 years now, and she has a side business of graphic design, and she wants to take that full time now that she's kind of saved up a little bit more because she wants to pay off her student debt and she wants to get a house just for security reasons because she grew up really, really poor. And so she tells Aiden that she is going to be quitting, and he just says, okay, no emotions, nothing. And she's kind of upset about it because she's been doing a lot for him the last 2 years, and to have nothing come out of Aiden and just make it all feel meaningless. But then after a couple months, Aiden comes begging for her to come back, and he gives her an offer she can't refuse, and also he wants her to marry him for a green card. So this is a marriage of convenience, which I didn't know going into this, but I feel like people who like this trope will definitely like this book, I feel like, because it's done so well. If you haven't seen my last vlog, I'll link it above or in the description, but I go really in depth with my thoughts on the marriage of convenience trope. But anyway, this was definitely a slow burn. Like, they didn't end up touching or anything until the half point of the book, and I definitely like the payoff. But the one thing, well, a couple things that I had an issue with is, one, the repetitiveness of Aiden's description. It was at least mentioned twice in a page, at least in the beginning, and then like maybe 1 or 2 times every chapter, and we just don't need that. That's a lot of repetitiveness on his stature. And for me personally, I really did wish we got Aiden's perspective in this book, because he's such a reserved, quiet person, and trying to get to know him through Vanessa's perspective was really hard because Vanessa has to infer what Aiden's feeling for us to know what Aiden's feeling. And for me, I love the mutual pining, and to get perspective from both characters about the mutual pining is everything. So I feel like I would have been more obsessed with this book and loved it more if we had two perspectives. And in this book, we delve into the topic of family toxicity and physical abuse, so trigger warnings for that. And I was very angry reading this just because of how people treat other people. I was furious. In the end, I gave this 4 stars. I really, really liked it, and I'm going to read Mariana Zapata's other books, starting with From Look Off with Love. I feel like that is one of her most popular ones. Okay, now let's talk about my DNF of the month, and that is Son of Blood and Ruin by Marilee Lares. This is my Fairy Loot edition. I try and read a subscription box books every month. Is that right? Subscription box book every month, and this was the book for June. And this was the September 2023 Adult Fairy Loot book. So I DNF'd this, and I kind of knew going in I would 80% not like this just because it is historical fantasy, but I still wanted to give it a try because it just sounded so good. So this is set in 16th century Spain and during the Spanish Inquisition, when the Spaniards came into Mexico City and spread their religion of Christianity. So any witchcraft that was performed was punishable by death. So we have Pantera, who is a Zorro type vigilante for Mexico City, and they're trying to fight the Spanish rule. We also find out that her real identity is Lady Leonora, who is set to marry the Prince of Spain. And there's an ancient prophecy going around talking about the end of the world, which is classic fantasy trope. And there was a seer that predicted that Leonora will die young, but that's not going to stop her from saving her country. So I got about 50 pages in and I realized that I was not interested. It was very political, and it's our real life politics, and I was just not interested. But don't get me wrong, I still think people should pick up this book just because I feel like the mythology around this, which is Mexican mythology, I don't see it around often. So I definitely do think that if people are interested in Mexican mythology, you should definitely pick this up, because I think the world building was doing pretty well from what I read so far. It's just unfortunately for me, it didn't interest me as I was reading it. So if anyone wants to buy this off me, DM me on Instagram. The link is always in the description. And the next book I read was The Name of All Things by Jen Lyons. This is the second book in the A Chorus of Dragons series. This series is basically about this prophecy where a group of people are destined to release the king of demons from his prison that 8 gods have put him in. And then we have our Morley Gray, Raylos Var, who's trying to fulfill this prophecy by pulling the strings of our main characters, who are Kieran and Janelle. So in the first book, we follow Kieran and we delve into his character and his background and everything he was trying to do to stop Raylos Var. And in this second book, we follow Janelle, who is recounting her story that happened the same time as the events of the first book and what Kieran was doing. And we find out her backstory and her character motivations and who she is, and also what she was doing to trying to stop Raylos Var. There's meddling gods, shapeshifters, immortal creatures, soul swapping, dragons, sentient horses. There's a lot to keep track of. The world is so rich and there's always something new to learn. And I feel like the highlight of this series is the way the story is told. So in the first book with Kieran, he's recounting his story from prison, and his captor, who's a shapeshifter called Talon, she's also recounting his story through memories of different people that she's killed and read minds of. And then that whole story is being transcribed by another character, and his thoughts is written into the book via the footnotes. And then in the second book, Janelle is recounting her story, and another transcriber is transcribing that story with her footnotes within the second book. And while I really enjoyed the first book and that type of storytelling, the second book, I feel like the voice of the transcriber and the way Janelle was telling the story to me felt a bit cringy, and the unique storytelling of this kind of lost its charm. I did give the second book 4 stars. I did really enjoy it just because there's just so much in this world to learn, and the plot as well is very fast moving and there's a lot that we don't know and what the consequences of their actions are. So I'm very, very intrigued and I definitely want to know how it ends. But I feel like the storytelling is hindering a little bit of my enjoyment of this series just because it's getting a bit old. And I've read the first chapter or so of the third book and the storytelling is essentially the same, but we do get the transcriber of the first book, which I do prefer because he's not very vocal as the transcriber in the second book. If I do end up hating the way the story is being told in the third book, I might DNF the series, but I'm hoping that I don't, because I actually do enjoy the story and I want to see what happens. And I would definitely say if you want to read this series, definitely relinquish control of trying to keep track of everything that's happening, because there's a lot. Because like I said, there's soul swapping and shape-shifting in Resurrection. There's a lot. So the last two books that I want to talk about go hand in hand because they're first and second book in a new series that I started. And that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder and Good Girl Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. So let's talk about them together. So this is the first and second book in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. It is a YA mystery series that's recently just been adapted to a TV show, a BBC TV show. And I think it just came out and I will definitely watch the show. So in this series, we follow a main character, Pippa, who took on a school project. And the school project of hers is to basically find out who murdered Annie Bell. And Annie Bell is this girl who went missing 5 years ago and is presumed murdered by her boyfriend, Sal Singh, who is also dead. Sal Singh's death was ruled out as a suicide, but Pippa doesn't think that Sal murdered Andy. So she's trying to figure out what happened to Andy with the help of Sal's younger brother, Robbie. So that's just the first book. The second book actually follows a different mystery, but there are some loose ends in the first book that gets tied into the second book, and I actually really, really like that. And I gave each of them 4 stars. This was also told in mixed media format just because she had production logs, call transcriptions, and just things like that, but it was also told normally. And I listened to some of the audiobook of the first book and I actually highly recommend it. It's a very high quality production audiobook. Before I went into the series, I really thought it was just going to be a fun YA mystery, but it gets dark, people. So trigger warnings for the first book for animal death, that really upset me. I did not expect that. And normally I'm not triggered by anything, but this animal death upset me. It really did. So definitely trigger warnings for that. In the second book, there is a more darker tone and darker atmosphere in the second book, and I feel like it's correlated directly to Andy's mental health. Another thing that I forgot to say is that the first and second book definitely delve into the topic of sexual assault, and the second book especially is darker in tone with the sexual assault topic, so definitely trigger warnings for that. So I wasn't expecting those types of topics necessarily and the darker tone with this series, but now that I've shifted my expectations, I'm still really, really enjoying this series and I definitely highly recommend it. And I get why people have been raving about this series, and I have heard that the third book goes into a more darker tone. I can definitely see that with Pippa's mental state. So I'm cautious into entering the third book because there's mention of stalking. That's already a whole huge dark topic and I'm not triggered by that, but trigger warnings for anyone who doesn't like stalking in their books. The third one does have it. But I'm keen to finish this series because I'm invested in Pippa's well-being. So those are the 6 books that I read in the month of June in my 1 DNF. Let me know what was your favorite read in the month of June and what was your least favorite read in the month of June. And if you have any thoughts about the books that I've read, please let me know down in the comments. Let's chat, discuss, spill the tea. If you made it to the end of the video, let's leave a football emoji for the wall of Winnipeg and me. Let's do that. Any type of football that you think is football, because what I think of football is soccer to everyone else, and what's football to everyone else is American football and footy for me. Whatever, just use the balls emoji in the description. Whatever balls you want. Like this video if you like it, subscribe if you want to. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!